Hello, folks. Welcome to Skin chapter. So the fancy word for skin in this chapter 4 is the integumentary system. The word integument refers to the covering. So we're talking about the skin which is covering around the body. So that's chapter 4. So the skin is comprised of a lot of different layers. It's a lot of different structures within. It's not just something simple as a flat sheet. There's a lot of things going on. So it's one of the organ systems. It's the first organ system that we're going to be talking about. And remember, before we talked about the fact that you have your atoms. Atoms combine to form the molecules. Molecules combine to form the cells. And then cells combine to form your tissues. And then you have different tissue types that combine to form your organs. So in this case, we got all kinds of stuff going on. We have epithelial cells on very top here. And then we have some dense tissue, dense irregular connective tissue, which is going to be down here. And then there is also some adipose tissue. And underneath, there is lots of stuff going on. The skin is considered to be an organ system. Now, what are the functions of the skin? Because in order to understand anatomy of it, we need to talk about what skin does. So functions of the skin, the most obvious thing is that it protects you. It covers you out, on the outside and the first line of defense. If you get a scratch, if there's some kind of disease like bacteria or viruses, your skin is going to prevent that pathogen from getting into your body. There are sweat glands in the skin. So for temperature regulation, in addition to that, you got blood vessels. So if you feel hot, then your face is flushed because the heat is being brought by your blood. It's going to your skin and then it's trying to get rid of the heat. So that's why your face is red when you go exercise. You also have all these receptors there. There are sensory receptors. So it's basically a nerve cell that's able to detect something isn't right. It's all sort of receptors there. So you have the free nerve endings that allow you to detect pain, temperature, and the other ones that allow you to detect light, touch, deep touch. And then there's secretion. So that's related to sweating, also making oils. So here you've had, glands that release sweat for cooling down and the oils that help you to prevent from drying out. So that's going to be secretion. Sometimes people have oily face and that's the oil being secreted. So I make a point here that secretion and excretion are two different things. Secretion is creating things for a purpose. For example, the sweat is to cool you down. The oil is to keep your skin lubricated. On the other hand, excretion is trying to get rid of waste products. So your skin is also tries to get rid of waste products. I'm gonna write that down. This is waste. So that's a big difference between secretion and excretion. So what do I mean by that? Well, the reason why you can't do a drug test using a hair sample is because when you take drugs, the breakdown products of the drugs, and those chemicals, they get excreted through your skin, and then it gets excreted through your skin, and then it gets recorded into your hair. So even though maybe you took drugs 6 months ago, that incident got recorded in your hair. And you can actually get a drug test and you'll still test positive for it. And then we all know that going outside is really good for our vitamin D synthesis. So if you're indoors all the time, you probably are not manufacturing vitamin D. Vitamin D is not something that you can just get. It happens when you go outside, then a little bit of sunlight will go ahead and convert vitamin D. It's a precursor molecule. So it's the reason the reason we drink milk is because vitamin D is fortified. And I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, primary care doctors will encourage you to take vitamin D supplements, but now I think it's, that trend has gone away, but that's where it's generated. If you go outside, you'll synthesize vitamin D naturally. Another place to get vitamin D is mushrooms. So if you want to get some vitamin D, you would in your diet, then eat mushrooms. Okay. So this block over here is big square, is basically your skin, and all the other stuff is going on is connected to it. So starting from the very top, if you were to take a needle and take the needle and you poke through your skin, the first thing you're going to hit is the epidermis. So that's the first thing you're going to hit. And the reason why we call it epidermis, because when you go deeper, the next layer is going to be called the dermis. Epi means top. So it's on top. It's called epidermis. And then if you have some kind of skin disorder, and then you're gonna go see a skin doctor, and they're called dermatologist. So the word dermis means skin, and it just means you know dermis means skin, and epidermis is something that's sitting on top of skin. So that's epidermis. And then skin specialist doctors are called dermatologist. So again, epi stands for on top. I mentioned that before, but I'll write it up again. So epidermis is something that's on top of dermis, and dermis means skin. Epidermis is the outermost covering, and the outermost covering is going to comprise of dead cells because of all the dandruff and dead skin cells that slough off. So that stuff is making up epidermis. The function for the most part is protection because the skin cells are already dead. Then if you scratch or damage, they just come off and we replace them with new dead skin cells. It's not a big deal. So then we have epidermis, then we have dermis, and then down here we have something called hypodermis. It's not considered skin. This is a layer that skin is connected to. So we got this layer down here. It's called hypodermis. And if you recall from general biology, we learned about the terms hypotonic, hypertonic, isotonic, when we learned about osmosis. So hyperosmotic or hypertonic. So that's the word hypo stands for below. It's something that's below the dermis. So epi stands for above, hypo means below. If you're hypothermic, that means your body temperature is below normal. If you're hyper, then that needs to be that means the opposite. So this pink layer here is the dermis, and then the dermis is connected to hypodermis because that's the layer below, and it's also called superficial fascia. We learned about that in the last lecture. The word fascia refers to CT, connective tissue, that you can see with your naked eye. So down here, there might be areolar connective tissue, a variety of things depending on where the skin is located again. So your skin is located, if your skin, so the skin below your elbow is what's going to be skin fascia and bone. It's not going to have all these different layers. And on your forearm, it's going to be skin, to be adipose, muscle, all kinds of things depending on where in the body we're talking about. So another term that we use to describe hypodermis is subcutaneous. It's called subcutaneous. Sub means again underneath. So if you go to a clinic, they'll be calling it sub-Q. Sub-Q is going to be shorthand for subcutaneous. Cutaneous refers to the chemicals that comprise of skin, or cutaneous also kind of refers to the skin. And it's going to be below, so it's called subcutaneous. So that might be another term we'll be using. So when you get a flu shot or when you get some kind of injection, do you know what they call the needle? I'm gonna pause for a bit and then maybe have you think about it. Or you can pause the video actually. I'm just gonna give you what it's called. So that's called hypodermic needle. The reason why they call it hypodermic needle is because it's related to everything I've just said. It refers to the skin, deeper part of the skin. That's hypo, means below the skin. So needle is supposed to inject the chemicals into the space below the skin. That's why it's called hypodermic needle. It's going to pierce your skin, go under, um, in deeper in it in order to inject things. And we're going to talk about all these other things in a second that are there in those layers. So here's a close-up of the epidermis. So you think it'd be really simple because it's so thin, but there are many layers. So we're going to have a whole bunch of slides talking about that. And then in the dermis layer, which is the actual skin, is comprised of two subcategories, and that's called papillary layer and reticular layer. And we did talk about this before. So we have two. And then the subcutaneous layer is the hypodermis, and that's whatever is underneath. So depending on you got yourself a fat or a muscle or a bone, it could be different kinds of things. This chart over here tells you what each layer does. So you've got epidermis and dermis, and then we don't have hypodermis here because technically hypodermis is not skin. Hypodermis is what skin is attached to, and that's the only reason we talked about it. So these are the features of epidermis. There are dead skin cells, and it's going to have so the epidermis have the dead skin cells. It has it protects you, and you have got pores or holes in your skin that's going to let things come out like water and oils. And then you got skin which cells are really connected to each other, and they have tight junctions. And because of those tight junctions, there's no space between the epithelial cells, and that's what's going to prevent the pathogens and water from getting into your body. It's a myth that if you sit in the bathtub, you absorb water. Your fingers and your toes get wrinkly. That's not true. That your skin is actually watertight. So the reason why your finger and toes get wrinkly is because the nervous system response. So if you severed the nerve that causes that, then you can sit in the bathtub all day long and your fingers will not get wrinkled. And then it synthesizes vitamin D. We talked about it earlier. You have sensory receptors. So going back, these are some of the sensory receptors. It says touch receptor. There are glands. So here, up here, you have the touch receptor. Okay, so and those sensory receptors help you feel the world around you. So this part here, epidermis, is a mixture of living things and dead or dying cells. On the other hand, dermis here is made up of living things. So over here, you got lots of blood vessels. So you have blood vessels in the dermis versus the epidermis. You don't have any there. So because you have the blood vessels in there, if you get a paper cut, you get and the cut doesn't go very deep, then you're not gonna bleed out. So let's say you get a paper cut and you get it only in the upper layer, which is the epidermis. You're gonna have a cut, you can see it's been slashed, but it might not bleed. It might not even hurt. You might not even feel any pain. That's because you didn't get a cut deep enough to get to the sensory receptors and the nerve endings. But you got a, paper cut on the top layer only. If it does go in the underneath layer, then it's gonna hurt, it's gonna bleed, because that's where you have your pain receptors and that's where you have your blood vessels. This is what epidermis looks like under the microscope. The epidermis is comprised of stratified squamous epithelium. And you should know what that is by now. The reason why it's called that is because this layer right here, I don't know if you can see it. Let me try to mark it for you. So this layer on top is epidermis. But so it's actually everything is epidermis here up to this point. But the reason I circled here is because the shape and the characteristics that we used to name this tissue is pretty clear here. So stratified squamous epithelium. If you zoom in on it, the portion I circled, you'll see these cells are flat. They're stratified, which stands for layers. And then flat is something that has to do with the shape. That's what squamous stands for. That means flat means layers, multiple layers of flat cells, basically. That's epithelium. So, and then you see these dark circles between these cells. Those are the nuclei. And there are many rows, so you have many layers. That's what stratified stands for. So what you want to do is you want to focus on the top part, the applicable part of the epidermis, and don't focus on the basal parts. The basal part of the epidermis you don't want to focus on because the cells are not in perfect shape. But here on top, they are more nice and round. And then they can be cubital shape, they can be columnar shape. They're alive, so. And then as they move up, so they can be cubital or columnar, but as you move up, they get more flat here. And then they start becoming flat because they're dying and being deprived of nutrients, and they start becoming flat in shape. And then they also have many layers, and this is the dead skin cell layer that's going to protect you. And what you have left over here is called the protein keratin. It's keratinized. Keratin is a protein you find in your skin, your fingernails, your hair, things of that sort. So basically a structural protein that you find depending on where you're looking in the body. Epidermis might be thick or epidermis might be thin. For example, on your hand and your feet, you have thick skin. Everywhere else is going to be thin skin. Then all the stuff that's coming off as dandruff and dead skin cells, that's going to be keratinized. So your skin is not going to be as simple, as a flat sheet. So next thing we're going to be talking about is the layers within this, epidermis. So we're going to look at that next. I'm going to stop this video here and then we'll continue next video.